that because of many events that took place, whether it was Yaakov, the way he spoke to Rachel, with a degree of insensitivity, when she asked that he should pray for her to have a child, and he spoke to her very sternly, strongly. So because of that, Yaakov had 33 years deducted from his life. According to another midrash, because when Lavan had accused someone in his family had taken his fetuses, he had used the word lo yichya. That person should not live, and the numerical value of yichya is 33. So we yesterday had asked if the reason why he had 33 years deducted from his life is because of lo yichya. The miracle, we understand why it's 33 years, but if it's only because he had spoken with a certain degree of insensitivity to Rachel, here she's a barren woman, and the words of the midrash are, is this the way you speak to a distressed woman? Therefore, you're going to have 33 years taken off your life. So how do we reconcile it? Where do we come up with 33 if the reason is because he spoke with this insensitivity to Rachel? Another question, and Mark answered this question. I asked the question last year, and I think it's the same answer. The Gemara says that Yosef was of the youngest brothers, and he passed away. He was the first of the brothers to pass away. Why? Because from here we see that when a person assumes great levels of responsibility, administration, because he was a king, he was the viceroy of Egypt, and he had this overwhelming emotional, mental, time-consuming burden to be responsible for the country, it wears a person down, and therefore a person ages prematurely. And therefore, as a result of this, he had 10 years, he actually passed away 10 years prematurely because he burnt the candle of both ends for all these years. I used to say in the olden days when I brought this up, one time it was known that a person became the president of the United States, the 4-year term, he would age 20 years. That's, of course, if he spent the year being the president. But if he spends 3 hours in the office a week, and most of the time he's either in a basement or on the golf course, no, that aging doesn't take place. But as a result of that, but that's what the Chazal say. From here we learn that a person who assumes to be this level of responsibility, this level of being an administrator, it shortens your life. Therefore, you should know in advance, this is one of the handicaps of entering into this level of responsibility. So we asked the question, and this question I asked, and Mark answered the question a year ago. Here it says the Chazal that when Yosef had spoken to his brothers and Yehuda was entering into this dialogue and presenting his case, he had mentioned Yaakov as the servant of this viceroy 10 times, and Yosef remained silent. So if each time he was saying silent, listening, hearing that his father is referred to as his servant, he had a year deducted from his life. So if that is the reason, how do we draw from there? How's the takeaway from Yosef that a person that enters into this level of pressure and degree of commitment, it shortens his life? That's the question I asked a year ago. So Mark answered the question. Let's see if Mark remembers his answer. Okay, but it was the answer, and it's the same answer to this. Under normal circumstances, a person burns the candle both ends. That's the reality, and that's Yosef. Yosef, if he wouldn't have remained silent, because he lived his life spiritually speaking, he's not subject and susceptible to what everybody else is susceptible. Therefore, he would have lived this whole full 120 years. But because he actually remained silent, which was considered disrespect 10 times, so that level of divine protection he didn't have. So now he's subject to what everybody's subject to. As a result of that, it shortened his life 10 years. That's what Mark answered last year, which is the right answer. Do you remember now? Do you remember the answer? So I'm saying here, he said lo yichya. When Lavan had accused him that someone had taken his fetuses, he said immediately that person should not live. And Rachel happened to be the one who took those fetuses. The numerical value of Yichya is 33. But that alone, according to the other opinions, because he spoke with insensitivity to Rachel Imenu, he wouldn't have had his years shortened. It would have been for Lo Yichya. Why? Because Rachel did it, as it says, L'Shem Shemaim. She did it so to wean a father from idolatry. So his curse wouldn't have taken effect. But so that's the reason why he wouldn't have had 33 years taken it, but because he spoke sternly to her. And Lo Yichya, the reason why she died, she died 33 years before her time because of the curse. Okay? But if you learn that's not the reason why he had 30 years taken from his life, it's because he spoke with insensitivity to her. That's why. But why 33 years? Because the numerical value of Yichya is 33. Instead, one goes in conjunction with the other. Similar as we're saying here. Under normal circumstances, regardless of his level of pressure and burden and stress, it shouldn't have shortened his life. But if you don't have that special divine protection, then you live within the normal realm of normalcy. Under normal conditions, you can't survive it. It automatically wears the person down. That's the handicap of what? Of that type of level of responsibility. Mem Hey Aleph. Yehuda presented such an ironclad case against Yosef, and I said, as the Chaim HaKadosh explains, this was done in a public setting. Yosef portrayed himself as a benevolent, compassionate ruler, and the way Yehuda had depicted him, it was a level of heartlessness to this elderly father, and it was clear the whole thing was a setup, and they were framed, and all he wanted Binyamin. Because, as I said, Yosef was the most beautiful human being who ever lived. He was the son of Rachel. Binyamin had similar beauty, not to the degree of Yosef, but he had many of those characteristics. And therefore, it was not uncommon that a ruler, he would find a young man, and that should be his mate, and he would sodomize him. Lo yochel Yosef l'sapek. Yosef, after hearing this, there's a question. He wasn't able to take control of himself after hearing either the way he depicted the pain of his father. He wasn't able to withhold himself, or because he wasn't able to conceal any longer who he was because of the level of embarrassment. All those who were present. This is the way where the Or Chaim says, because they were present and they saw the way he was depicted as this cruel, heartless monarch. Immediately he called out that everybody should be removed from his presence. Nobody should be present at that point. And nobody was present when Yosef made himself known to his brothers. He didn't want anybody other than what? Then his brothers should be there. So Rashi himself says something interesting. Why? Firstly, Rashi learned something beautiful. He was not able to tolerate if the people were there. Therefore, he dismissed everyone. After what Yosef had gone through, the trauma, and they sold him to slavery, and what he suffered, he said, let them taste a little bit of what I've tasted. Yosef could not tolerate that by revealing who he is to his brothers, the shame that will be seen on their faces, that the Egyptians should witness this, under no circumstance would he put his brothers in that situation that they should have that level of embarrassment in the presence of these Egyptians. This is all contained within the family. There's the expression in English, we don't wash our dirty laundry in public. No, whatever we have, let's keep it within the family. Yosef, because of his sensitivity to his brothers, who they were, and Yosef was a tzaddik. As a result of that, he didn't want his brothers should be suffered this embarrassment in the presence of all these Egyptians. And Rashi citing Chazal. There's a medrash. Now, we had mentioned that Yosef's oldest son, his name was Menashe. What was the basis for the name Menashe? So we had read in last week's reading that because he said, Hinashani Elokim as Beis Avi B'Kol Amoli. God has caused me to forget my father's household and all the trauma and all the angst which I suffered there. Therefore, he chose his firstborn to have that name. That's Menashe. That God caused him to forget about his father's household and all that he experienced there. And why is this a basis for a name? So we had explained that Yosef himself was taught by his father all the Torah that he'd studied in Shem and Aver. Why was he taught that Torah? And only Yosef was taught this. Yaakov did not teach this Torah to his other sons. Because just as Yaakov is the patriarch of Golus, of exile, nobody suffered among the patriarchs, or nobody spent as much time as exile as Yaakov. And when he went through, when he was in the house of his father-in-law, and he earned his wealth during that 6-year period, 20 years, his encounter with his brother Esav, his daughter being raped, all what he went through, he epitomizes the exile of the Jewish people. And that's what we explained. That's why he's the one who enacted the Arvis service, the Ma'ariv service, which is done at nighttime, because night represents Golus. Nighttime, because everything is distorted at night. One doesn't have clear understanding of what's going on. One doesn't have clear perception. Yosef had these characteristics. And since Yaakov knew that ultimately the Jews are going, his family's going into exile, they're going to Egypt, because this was the covenant between the parts with Avram Avinu, and it's just a question of time. Yosef would be the provider. He would oversee and prepare for that exile, to guarantee the survival, the spiritual survival of the Jewish people, despite the influences of Egypt. That was Yosef. But the question is, we have a problem. Yosef himself, to be a proper provider, he has to apply himself selflessly. In terms of what he experienced with his brothers, as much as normally a human being is able to put himself out, but because of what they had done to him, it's literally an impossibility. The amount of input and investment, emotional, mental, selfless dedication to his brothers, it's an impossibility. All of a sudden, he experienced something which is miraculous. Whatever he experienced in his father's household, it was totally erased from his memory, from his emotion. Meaning, Hashem performed a miracle that he saw his brothers as a brother would see a brother, and the past was not relevant. So as a result of that, that was a confirmation. At this moment, he's ready to take the reins of leadership to begin preparing for the exile, because that miracle only took place because he must be in that state of mind to be fully committed to provide for the future exile, which would have been impossible if not. So therefore, Menashe is a representation of the miracle which allowed the survival of the Klal Yisrael, the family of Yaakov and Golus in Egypt. That's how we explained it. So now, because that already took place, what's his feelings towards his brother? He had love towards his brothers, as if nothing ever took place in the past. If he would have been emotionally scarred because of the past, humanly, he wouldn't have cared. Let his brothers be embarrassed. Let them have a taste of what he tasted. That did not exist within his emotional or psychological or psyche whatsoever. As a result of that, he says, remove everyone from his presence, because he was going to reveal himself to his brothers, and he didn't want these Egyptians to see his brothers being embarrassed. But that was a result of the Menashe, that God allowed him to forget, or caused him to forget, that he should be the proper, because even now going forward, he still has plenty to do, to settle his family there, to provide for them, because there's still years of famine, and to make sure that the influences of Egypt are kept at arm's length from them, that they should not be impacted negatively as a result of being in Egypt.